These are the first pictures at the first meeting of the new College of Commissioners that will be ruled by Ursula von der Leyen. Right after her, with a super portfolio including competition and the transition to a cleaner industry, there will be the Spanish socialist Teresa Ribera. She's set to become the second most powerful woman in the EU. One of her main tasks will be transforming the European industry so the EU can reach its 2050 zero emissions target, taking the bloc from grey to green.
I think that it is also important to understand that what we try to do is not to color or switch from a color to another color, but to try to identify in a crystal clear manner what it does not harm our ecosystems, our environment, and how we can do it in a way that from an economic and social perspective makes sense.
However, her long career as a climate change expert and her anti-nuclear stance has granted her some opposition. The EPP wants her mandate to be different from the previous vice president on the green transition.
We don't need a second Timmermans. He was pushing things on industry, on SMEs, on farmers, and people were overwhelmed. So we need another attitude.
Since 2018, Rivera has been one of the most powerful women in Pedro Sanchez's government in Spain. During her mandate, she negotiated the Iberian exception that allowed Spain and Portugal to limit the price of energy and calendarize the closure of the nuclear plants in Spain. But first, she will have to pass the final exam from the European Parliament like all the other future commissioners.
The European Union is set to allocate 14 million euros to the Canary Islands to improve their ability to accommodate migrants. The funds will also be used to strengthen support for unaccompanied migrant children and teenagers, many of whom lost their parents during the perilous boat journey from West Africa. EU Commissioner Margaritis Schinas made the announcement while on a visit to the islands, where he met with President Fernando Clavijo Batlle. Schinas highlighted the enormous pressure faced by Canarian institutions in the face of the growing crisis, while Batlle added that Schinas had spoken of unity and solidarity during their meeting. Between January and August of this year, the Canary Islands have recorded the arrival of 22,300 migrants, a number which is expected to increase in the coming months.
The European Commission has rebuffed the Dutch government's recent request to secure an opt-out clause from the EU's migration and asylum rules. A Commission spokesperson told reporters in Brussels it had received The Hague's letter, penned by the Dutch Minister for Asylum and Migration, and that there were no plans currently to provide the exemption.
There's no treaty change upcoming, therefore this is the current situation. We have also taken and welcomed the fact that the Minister has said that they will continue to prioritise the implementation of the pact, which is clearly a priority for the Commission.
Marjolein Faber, the Dutch politician in charge of asylum and migration, wrote the government wanted to drastically reduce the volume of migrants to the Netherlands to deliver better social services. However, the member of the far-right ultranationalist party conceded in the communiqué that if her request fell on deaf ears, The Hague would continue to uphold the EU's migration rules.
Trust and participation in elections all over the world is declining for 8 years in a row. Something that is also happening in Europe, as the Global State of Democracy report states. For Europe, polarization in politics is one of the issues, says Sam van der Staak, the director of International Ideas Euro program.
It's countries that have been in the news, but also a lot of countries that as an outsider you wouldn't suspect. Countries like Greece and Bulgaria and Spain and Portugal and the Netherlands and outside the EU, the United Kingdom. They're still very healthy, functioning democracies, but you see that in parts of the system things are cracking. And that's often because of the politics is really putting a lot of pressure on how democracy functions. There's more polarization, there's more pressure from political parties to say things need to change. And of course, there's a lot of citizens that are dissatisfied by the way that democracy is delivering on their everyday concerns.
But not everything is bad news in Europe. For van der Staak, the improvement in Central and Eastern European countries is closing the divide between old, established democracies and newer ones, helping Europe come together. The State of Democracy report identifies, however, two main causes to explain why politics loses credibility.
We've seen it in countries like France, Spain, the Netherlands, Bulgaria, all across Europe. There's been votes for the extremes that after the election stay out of power, and people then wonder why go and vote at all. There's also the pressure from outside. So we see that there's forces such as Russia, but also other authoritarian powers that try to abuse this weakness that we're seeing to stir even more dissatisfaction. So there's a pressure from outside through disinformation, through cyber attacks on elections, through foreign funding.
For van der Staak, elections worldwide are a source of concern, with 10% lower participation than 15 years ago, and with 20% of recent years' elections where the losing candidate does not accept the outcome.
The European Union has begun the process of deducting a €200 million fine from Hungary's share of the EU budget after Budapest missed the payment deadline for a second time. Hungary was fined by the EU's top court for breaking the bloc's migration rules by depriving migrants of their right to apply for asylum.
When it comes to the €200 million fine, the 15-day deadline expired yesterday. That means that the Commission is, in accordance with the applicable rules, moving to what we call the offsetting procedure. So what we are going to do now is to deduct the €200 million from upcoming payments from the EU budget towards Hungary.
The court has also imposed an additional fine of €1 million for every day that Hungary fails to comply. In response to the fines, Hungary has threatened to send migrants from its southern border to the EU's headquarters in Brussels. It's also threatened to sue the EU executive to reimburse the cost of protecting the bloc's external border, which the government says has cost roughly €2 billion.
Both the Italian and French defense ministers attended the second day of the European Air and Missile Defense Conference that took place in the Italian capital. The debate over how to better protect European skies against Russian threats touched on the military, industrial and political aspects and the presence of around 200 military and business leaders. Russia's war in Ukraine has sped up the need to strengthen the defense system across the continent. Along with that, questions have been raised on how to support the European arms industry. But as Italy's defense minister Crosetto says, it's a race against time. Ensuring the self-reliance of the European defense sector is one of the priorities.
Non siamo pronti a vivere la sfida dei tempi in cui ci è dato di vivere. Siamo lenti e non è un'accusa, come spesso viene detto alle aziende, è una constatazione. O abbiamo un'industria europea che abbia la capacità europea e non debba difendere da nessuno, oppure non siamo in grado di garantire la difesa europea.
Building a dialogue among key players and connecting them is crucial, and it was one of the aims of the conference.
Avviare una cooperazione tra Stati europei, difese europee, industria europea, intanto eliminando tutte le barriere burocratiche che ci fanno perdere tempo.
Je pense que cette réflexion stratégique a du bon, elle oblige l'ensemble des acteurs à partager, à discuter, elle permet aussi d'associer étroitement les équipes de l'Alliance Atlantique. Elle permet de nourrir aussi une intimité plus forte entre les industriels et nos soldats.
Another conference has already been announced for next year, but the debate is set to continue within European institutions. The EU has just named its first defence commissioner. Bolstering European defence and security is in fact at the heart of the next EU Commission's agenda. Giorgio Orlandi for Euronews in Rome.
The European Union has begun the process of deducting a €200 million fine from Hungary's share of the EU budget after Budapest missed the payment deadline for a second time. Hungary was fined by the EU's top court for breaking the bloc's migration rules by depriving migrants of their right to apply for asylum.
When it comes to the €200 million fine, the 15-day deadline expired yesterday. That means that the Commission is, in accordance with the applicable rules, moving to what we call the offsetting procedure. So what we are going to do now is to deduct the €200 million from upcoming payments from the EU budget towards Hungary.
The court has also imposed an additional fine of €1 million for every day that Hungary fails to comply. In response to the fines, Hungary has threatened to send migrants from its southern border to the EU's headquarters in Brussels. It's also threatened to sue the EU executive to reimburse the cost of protecting the bloc's external border, which the government says has cost roughly €2 billion.
Draft Resolution A/10/L31/Revision 1 is adopted.
The UN General Assembly overwhelmingly adopted a Palestinian resolution on Wednesday demanding that Israel end its unlawful presence in Gaza and the occupied West Bank within a year. The resolution also demands the withdrawal of all Israeli forces and the evacuation of settlers from the occupied Palestinian territories without delay.